Hi, and welcome to episode 19 of Stitched in Sweden. I'm Maria, your host, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as mmonska. The show notes for this episode and all the other episodes are on the blog, which is stitchedinsweden.blogspot.com, and we also have a Ravelry group. This week in the Ravelry group, we will be finishing up the Spring Lattice KAL, and that will be finishing on Friday, June 5th. I will be closing the thread and drawing 2 winners before the next time I podcast on next week on Monday, and I will announce the winners then. So just while we're talking about the KAL really quick, I will show you one of our lovely prizes that was donated by Lee of Luli Bags on Etsy. This is her, I think this is her medium-sized project bag. You can see her card here, etsy.com/shop/shopluli. And I talked about this bag last week, but I just wanted to say again how nice of a sturdy bag it feels. Like, I have been using mine this week, which is the small size, but it's made of a similar, I don't know what kind of fabric it is, but maybe it's a canvas or something, some kind of woven fabric that is quite sturdy. I mentioned also last week that the inside has pockets and a white lining, which I really like for project bags because you can look into your project bag and see what you're working on. So this beautiful bag will be one of the prizes that I draw for, which will be for a randomly selected winner in the finished object thread. And there have been lots of shawls coming in this week, which has been really nice to see. I'm sure there will be a couple of more just sneaking in over the next couple of days, and I'm looking forward to seeing those. If you've finished your shawl, if you've bound off, but you don't get a chance to block it before Friday, still post a picture in the finished object thread, and you will be eligible to win a prize. So, and then of course we would love to see a finished picture as well, but you can post that in the chatter thread, which I'll keep open a bit longer. So yeah, so the KAL has been going great, and that is ending this week. You can check out the hashtag SpringLatticeKAL on Instagram and see some pictures there that people have been posting. So it's been really neat to see a lot of the different color combinations and yarn choices that people are using for their shawls. So yeah, looking forward to that. Let's see, so this week in Stockholm, not a whole lot happened. It has been a very rainy day today and yesterday and the day before, and very windy, so the weather says sun for Thursday and Friday, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed for a sunny birthday, and hopefully we'll be going over to Thomas's parents' house, and I think we're going to grill some salmon and just have a relaxing evening there, hopefully outside in the sun. We'll see. This week though, I did do a few things around, well, I've been doing a lot of knitting. I've been doing a lot of planning of knitting, and I did some other things too, like planted some new flowers for a little window, sort of like a rectangular window planter that we have in the kitchen. We have 2 of them, and one of them sits on the kitchen windowsill, and that has basil, oregano, and thyme. And we also have a little teacup, actually it's a massive teacup, which is like this big, and that also has basil in it, so we use it as a planter. So I've had those plants sitting in the planter for probably 2 or 3 weeks at this point, and I just hadn't planted them. So this week I got some soil in there and planted those, so we've been enjoying some fresh herbs, and like last night we had some delicious pasta sauce with fresh herbs, which was really nice. And in the morning we had a tomato basil mozzarella sandwich on a baguette. So it tastes like summer is arriving, but doesn't seem like it is outside. And then I planted some flowers, and that planter is sitting on the kitchen table, but I might have to move it to the living room window, which is what I record in front of, because I don't know if it's getting quite enough sun on the kitchen table. We will see. I also can show you, actually I just remembered this, I got a little succulent. I don't want to lean it over too much, but this is in a beautiful pot that my sister made, and she actually made me 4 of these little pots, and they are very similar sizes, but actually could all stack. You could see there's 2 of them are right back there. One of them is here, and it has a dying flower in it, so I will need to replant something else in there. But I would like to get some more succulents and plant them in those. That just sits on my windowsill too. So, not a whole lot going on this week. Thomas is studying for his exams. He has one today, and so it's been mostly me trying to leave him alone and let him study. So I've been watching podcasts, listening to the radio, and knitting and planning, doing some designs, watching, things like that. So I'll start with sharing some things I've been working on this week. And I'm just going to share like active knitting for this week. Because there's some projects that I just haven't been working on. The main thing that I worked on this week is the Sparrow tunic for my mom. And I really want to get this finished up soon, like in this next week, because my parents will be coming to Europe soon, and I would like to have it finished so that it's all ready to go when they're here and that I don't have to be worried about it. I have finished the front. I finished that last week. I reblocked it because last week only one side was blocked. So here's the front piece. And you can see that I still have the ends on stitch holders with little extra balls of yarn here just in case I need to lengthen the straps. This will have about 1 inch or so of twisted rib on all of the edges, so around the neckline and around the armholes. But I have seamed this up the front. I showed you that last week, and I woven some of the ends, but there's still some along the edge which will be stitched into the seam. So on the front seam I have an exposed seam, because that's kind of part of the design and look of it, but then on the sides it will be an invisible seam. So I will be able to weave in the ends into that seam on the inside. And I also did finish the back of the tunic, which will be a little bit more difficult to show you because it's soaking wet right now, but I can try and show it to you a little bit. Here it is on my drying mat. You can see it up here. Oh, falling. Never mind. I'll show you next week. Hopefully it will be all finished and attached. But yeah, that's a wet mess, so I am quite pleased with how the shaping on the back turned out, and I'm hoping that everything will come together this week and that it will fit and the pieces, everything will be in proportion and things like that. It's looking good so far, but I always find that until you do the final finishing touches of a garment, like putting on the bands around the neck and things like that, that it always looks a little bit like, maybe this isn't going to work out. That's another reason why I'm blocking the pieces now, because before the backs were really just curling up so much that it was hard to get an idea of whether or not the shaping had turned out well. I did some short row shaping on the bottom so that I could get a nice, a slight curve to the back bottom, where like a shirt tail curve, a slight one, and I used short rows for that, like I said. So I was thinking about talking a little bit about short rows next week, because a lot of people are really intimidated by short rows, and I can understand why, because sometimes, because they're a little bit abstract, but I think a lot of times people make them seem like a big scary thing when they're really not. And if you just understand how they work, it's really, really quite a simple technique, and it can be really good for shaping and getting a garment to fit you well, or turn the fabric in a different way, like if you want to have a nice edge. So I'll talk about that next week, I think. Let me know if you have any specific questions about short rows that I can answer in next week's episode. Just leave a note in this week's episode. That'd be great. So I did knit a lot on the Sparrow tunic. I knit one whole side on the back. I had finished, I can't remember if I had almost finished or had finished the top of one side of the back, and then this week I knit the entire other side and seamed them together. So as soon as that piece is dry, I will probably seam it to the front, and then I'll be doing the bands around the neck hole and the armholes. So maybe that will be the finished project next week. We'll see, hopefully. Another project that I'm working on that I hope will be finished this week is my Swedish spring shawl. This is what I've been calling Swedish Spring 3.0, and this project has been, I moved it from a different project bag to this project bag, which is from Lee of Luli, Shop Luli on Etsy, and she is the one who donated our lovely heart bag here, and she sent this cute little bird bag along for me, and I thought that this was just the perfect bag for my Swedish spring, because it has little birds on it, so spring-like, and also because it's really exactly the same color as the yarn I'm working with. So I have just finished, actually I have just started the last sort of chevron lace repeat before the edging lace, and you could see where I was last week. This is a little progress keeper from Mina Makes. So I was right there last week, and I will be doing one more of these chevron lace repeats and then doing the edging. And it's obviously not easy to show you this on the needles, but actually that's not so bad. You get an idea of the lace. But I am really looking forward to this one being finished and getting that blocked, because I really love blocking lace shawls and just seeing how nice and crisp they look when they're finished. I've been working on some design swatches this week as well, which I'm not going to share with you this time. But yeah, I'm really excited about them. I have, basically, in the last week, I have 4 new designs that I'm planning. 2 of them are probably going to be cowls or wraps. And then one of them is a little baby vest. And the last one is a shawl. So those will all be... I'm probably not going to talk about them that much because it's always a little bit, I don't know. Like, why should I tell you about them if I'm not going to show you them? It's kind of like, I have a secret that you can't know about, but I'm going to tell you about it. Anyway, I'll just tell you now that I am working on some new designs, and I'm really excited with how they're coming out. They will all have some sort of lace elements, but the baby vest will be very simple, and I think it will be really adorable. Of course, it's something that I'm designing, so... Anyway, the cowls will also be lacy, but they will also have elements of stockinette stitch in them, because sometimes with lace, it's really nice to have a yarn that looks great in lace fabric. So, you know, because then you can see the lace, and if the fabric looks nice, then you end up with a nice piece of knitting, like a shawl or a cowl or something. But sometimes I think that yarn looks really pretty in stockinette stitch, and it gives you more of a feeling of what the yarn looks like. So, rather than being broken up by eyelet holes. So, it will be a combination of more lacy parts and then some more solid parts as well. And I'm looking forward to them, so that's all I'm going to say about those. Okay. Oh yeah, so I forgot to talk about the yarn that I'm using for the Sparrow tunic is the Onion Fino Organic Woolen Nettles. I forgot to bring this tag last week, so there it is. This is a DK weight, I think. It says 4mm needles, so... And it comes in 50 grams, which is 130 meters, so actually maybe that's more like a sport. And I have this much left, which is probably about 30 grams, and that will definitely be enough, plus my little extra balls on the ends there of the front, where I will be able to finish the bands and everything with 6 50-gram balls. So that's good. I won't have to get any more, I think, so. I really like how that yarn knit up, and I like the drape that it has. I think it will be, it's very soft. I think it will be nice and cool for the summer. But I don't know that I would knit with it again for a large piece, because I did find that my hands were quite crampy at times from knitting with the plant fiber. Which is unfortunate, because I would really love to knit a summer top in linen, but I don't think that I would be able to, because I had to do, I think it was this week, where I didn't knit for 2 days straight, because, actually 3 days straight, because my thumbs and wrists were hurting, and my shoulder. And I think it was mostly from knitting too much in the plant fiber. So that's not good, because when I knit with wool, I really don't have a problem, hardly ever. So I think this will probably be the last time I do that for a while, or I'll have to think of a smaller project, or have a project that is not on any sort of deadline. I don't know, we'll see. I did finish a top this week, and if you follow me on Instagram, then you saw it. I was planning on wearing it today, but I'm wearing a long sleeve sweater, and I'm sitting with a blanket on my lap, and the heat is on because it's June 1st, but it feels like winter. So maybe on Friday I'll get to wear this. We will see. I finished my water lily top. And this line here is just from it being folded. You can see how drapey it is. It's really nice and drapey and soft, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Here's the whole thing. You can see it has some fold lines, but what about this top? Well, you can see the picture of it on Instagram, and I'll post it in the show notes as well. But I'm really pleased with the fit. And when I first took it off the needles, I was worried that I had overcompensated for the back neck. So people on Ravelry and also Kristen on the Yarngasm podcast have been mentioning that the back neck was really like droopy and didn't lie nice and flat on the back of your neck. So there were some suggestions in the Ravelry project pages of different people, and I took those suggestions into consideration and kind of did a mixture of them, which basically included purling 3 together along the back neck instead of purling 2 together. But I did like occasional purl 3 together, so I think I did like purl 2 together and then purl 3 together. It makes sense if you have the pattern. But when I took it off the needles and I tried it on before I blocked it, the back kind of like pulled in a way, and it felt like it was too tight. But after I blocked it, which I just got it wet, laid it on that mesh sweater dryer thing that you saw, it really fits perfectly, and I'm really happy with it. It was also a little bit tricky with this one because you're supposed to block the lace when you're done knitting it before you seam the shoulders together, but I didn't do that, and you know how lace is when it is blocked, it grows a lot, and it could pretty dramatically change size, both width and length. So that could work to your advantage if you need to change the size. So if it's a little bit too small, then you could pull it out. But if it's too big, then you're kind of stuck, or you have to just rip out. So I didn't block it before, and I probably should have done that, but I was just kind of like ready to be done with it and excited to wear it. So I didn't do that, and what I did basically was sort of stretched out the lace on my couch surface so it was kind of like grippy, and measured that way. But yeah, I really like it. The fabric is nice and soft and drapey, and I think I'm going to be able to wear it. I really hope I will be able to wear it. I'm pretty sure I will be able to. I took some pictures of me wearing it, and I didn't have any problems with it itching. You can maybe tell that it does have quite a little hair layer. Like, it's pretty fuzzy. Like, not in a bad way at all. It's still a very nice fabric that it makes, but you can tell that there's lots of little short fibers from the alpaca which stick out, and that's definitely something that can cause a prickle factor for people with sensitive skin. Anyway, I'm really happy with how this turned out. Modifications that I made, now that I've been talking about it forever, some modifications that I made were that I added some waist shaping, and I lengthened the body. I put in waist shaping on the fronts at the quarter points up and down here, so I did like 2 decreases and then 2 increases before the bust, and on the back I did the same thing at the third, so I split it into thirds instead of into fourths. And the other modification that I made is that I started the V-neck line shaping a little bit sooner than it was called for in the pattern, because I wanted a lower V-neck, or I wanted it to be more like a V-neck instead of more like, in the pattern it's more like this crew neck sort of, but it is in the shape of a V. so I wanted the V part to be a little bit lower. Anyway, that is the water lily. It is a pattern in Pom Pom Quarterly magazine, and it is by Megan Fernandez. It's a really great pattern. I would definitely recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for beginners, just because if you're a really beginner lace knitter, it's difficult in the neckline shaping because there isn't a chart really written out exactly how you do the decreases or how you continue the lace in the decreasing area. If you have knit lace before, then you can probably figure it out, no problem. But everything wasn't totally laid out in the pattern, which is fine. Like, it's easy to figure out, but I wouldn't pick it as a first lace project, probably. Alright, so this week I was thinking of just a simple technique tip that I would like to share with you, which is something that many of you probably know how to do already, but perhaps some of you don't. And I remember that I didn't know how to do this until I started spinning yarn. And before then, it was always kind of a mystery to me, and I felt like it was sort of a silly question to ask how to do, but I couldn't really find any information about it because it's so simple, maybe. So anyway, in case you're interested, I am going to show you this week how to turn any sort of ball of yarn, so like this or this or this. This is what I used on my water lily. So any sort of ball like this into a skein of yarn like this, or a hank of yarn. I always thought this was called a skein, but apparently Kemper from Junk Yarn said this is not called a skein, and this is called a skein. I don't know about that, but maybe we should do some research. Anyway, if you like to do mini swaps, and maybe you want to know how to make these little twists of yarn, or all the hand dyers who make lovely twists of yarn. This obviously isn't like a perfect one, but it works and does the job. So I will show you how to do that using a Nitty Knotty, which is this tool here. I have this tool, which was given to me by a knitting friend who used to live in Stockholm, and she gave this to me because she had another one and she didn't need two. But before I had this, I was using the back of two chairs together. You can do this on other surfaces too. Like if you're doing mini skeins, sometimes a book could be useful to do this when you wrap the yarn around, or like a lid of a plastic container. So I will just show you how to do this now using the Nitty Knotty. And I personally like to keep my yarn stored in skein, or whatever this is called, form. Sometimes, because to me this is much more appealing to work with and look at in my stash than like this. This one looks pretty good, but sometimes they get pretty tangled and are really floppy and are like half squished, and to me that's not something that I would ever really pick up again and want to knit with, whereas this, I can see this as a new project with new possibilities. So I will show you how to do this. So basically, each Nitty Knotty could be a different length. Some of them are standard like 2 meters or 1 meter. In the US, they're in yards, obviously. This one is kind of a medium-sized one, and it is 1.38 yards, which is kind of a random size, but it doesn't really matter as long as you measure it, and then you could figure out, it's also a good way to figure out yardage. So like for this, you could, if it's some leftover amount, you can figure out approximately how many yards you have left. So here's what you do. Just start, I usually grab onto the middle and I hold the yarn and I start winding around, and you just follow the same contour every time. You just follow the, I don't know why I said contour, I don't think it's a contour. You just follow the same path that the yarn goes on. Move this. And then you just keep doing it. Oops. And you keep doing it. So you get to the last part here and you have two ends. This one and this one that you were holding in the middle. I usually hold on to it the entire time. And you just let them fall into their place, and then you can tie some leftover yarn or whatever around. You can either do sort of like a figure 8 within splitting the yarn into a figure 8. I don't know, you don't split the yarn into a figure 8, but you could split it into sort of like this and then weave a figure 8 in there, or you can just tie off the ends. And I usually will catch the end in the tie. I didn't this time. So you get the little ends, and then sometimes one side of the knitting knotty will be smooth like this, and one side will have a little edge where it wouldn't be easy to slide off. Same with on the bottom. And also notice how the poles are perpendicular to each other. So basically what you want to do is find that edge with no lip, and you just pull it off. If you have hand spun yarn that you're doing with this, at this point this would be like maybe a little bit curly. But basically what you do is then you just take it and twist it around and around and around, and then let it kink up on itself. This is how I do it. And I grab one side through the other side and I pull on the end and kind of just let it twist, and then you get a nice little skein like this. Obviously, if you wanted it to look prettier, you could do the ties in the same color yarn as you're winding it with, and you don't have to make such huge bows. But that's how you do it. And then to me, like, this is more appealing to pick out of my stash and knit again with. And even though that means that then I have to wind it again, I think that it's prettier, it's easier to store because they can all just lie next to each other, and there's less of a risk that when I pull it out again that it's going to be a big tangly mess from like a half ball collapsing in on itself. So there we go, that is the technique tip for this week. So the question that I'm going to answer this week came from a viewer called Give Me a Crown, and she's from Australia, and she asks how I measure my knits. And I was thinking about this week, especially while I was knitting my water lily top and finishing that one off and trying to decide how long I was going to knit the top lace portion. Ideally, I would have blocked it first and laid it flat out on a surface and measured it that way, but I didn't do that. I just laid it on my couch and measured. But while I'm knitting, depending on what I'm knitting, I will measure in a different way. So I think the reason why she asked this question is because sometimes it's hard to know where you should be measuring from. So when you're knitting, for example, the row that you just worked is, obviously the loops are still on the cord or the needle, and every row that, like, the next row that you will work, this row will be counted in the knitted fabric. But if you, this is not going to make very much sense, but if you are measuring up to just underneath your needle, then you're not including this row that you already worked in your measurements. So she was saying, like, do you measure to the top of your needle? Do you measure to the middle? Do you just measure the fabric? Does it matter? That kind of thing. So I think in general, I actually usually measure to the bottom of my needle, which might not be the best idea because you are missing that last row. But if I'm knitting something like a garment, like a top, it doesn't really apply for this one so much because the lace part was at a different gauge than the main body part. But a lot of times when I'm knitting a top, I'm not so concerned with the measurement of the piece as with the row count that I have. The interesting thing about swatching is, of course, when you swatch your yarn, if you measure your swatch before you wash it, then you have an idea of how your knitted fabric will be while you're actually knitting it, because obviously as you're knitting a piece, the fabric that's coming off your needles isn't washed. It's not blocked. It's not like how it will be in the end. So where I think some people get into a problem and they say like that their gauge swatch lied to them, you may have heard that before, like, oh, I don't swatch anymore because my gauge swatch always lies. Part of the thing I think that some people may not realize that they're doing, or they may not think makes that much of a difference, is that they are looking at two different swatch measurements. They are possibly measuring their original swatch that they did to plan their project as a washed and blocked swatch, and then they're measuring their knitted fabric as they're knitting as unwashed. And it's important to know the difference between what your stitch count and row count is on your washed fabric versus your unwashed fabric, so that while you are knitting, you could measure or count, if you want, your rows, or measure the length, and you would have an idea of how it will actually come out when it's washed and blocked. Because sometimes, like, think about it this way. If you're getting 5 rows per inch, so like 5 vertical knit column rows per inch, let's just say, as an example. And that's in your, let's say that's in your unwashed fabric. So as you're knitting, you're getting 5 rows per inch. But when you have your washed fabric, the fabric stretches out a little bit, so you're only getting 4 rows per inch. So that means for every row that you're knitting of unwashed fabric, you're actually, if you knit 5 rows, which you think, oh, this is 1 inch, and you measure the unwashed fabric and it's 1 inch and you knit 5 rows, well, actually, that's going to be like 1¼ inches in the washed fabric, because that extra row, which in the 5th row of the unwashed fabric will become the 1st row of the next inch in the washed fabric, if that makes sense. You'll basically be adding an extra row for every single inch in your fabric. So if you think like your torso is, let's say you knit 15 inches for your torso length. Well, 15 inches, if you knit 5 rows for every inch, you're going to end up with way more stitches, or way more inches in the end in your length of your fabric. Okay, I can't do math on camera, so let's say 5 times 15 is 75, I think. Yes. So in your unwashed fabric you would have 75 rows to equal those 15 inches of torso length. But if you, really your gauge is 4 rows per inch. So you only need 4 times 15 inches. You only need 60 rows. So you end up with 75 rows, but you only needed 60. So you have 15 extra rows, and you divide that by 4, that's 3.75 extra inches of knitting that you would get. So maybe that didn't make any sense at all, but basically the point is there's a really important difference between measuring your washed fabric versus your unwashed fabric. Now, if you make a swatch and you measure it before you wash it, and it's the same row gauge and stitch gauge as after you wash it, then you have no problem when you're knitting. You can knit along and measure as you please, and you will get an accurate reflection, probably, of what your final fabric will look like. But it's harder to do that when you are getting a different gauge with the washed versus unwashed fabric. And if that's the case, which I think usually it is, then to me it's more important to know your row gauge and actually be counting the number of rows that you're knitting rather than measuring with measuring tape. Please let me know if you have any questions about that, because that was a little bit, I don't know, disorganized. We have some action in the hallway. But yeah, I think that is a big part of information that was missing from my swatching and gauge video was acknowledging the difference between washed and unwashed swatches. But I didn't really talk so much about row gauge, so here is a little talk about it, and maybe I could do another kind of extra video about row gauge if anybody wants, but hopefully that was enough to explain it just now. So that's pretty much it for this week. I hope to get some projects finished this week. I would really like to finish the Sparrow tunic and the Swedish spring shawl. Even though I don't have that many projects on the needles right now, for some reason this week I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed with my projects that I was working on, and I sort of felt like I was getting to the point where I wasn't making any progress on anything because I was making just a little bit of progress on everything. So I'm definitely someone who needs to have fewer projects on the needles at one time. And I tend to knit things, like I sort of tend to knit one thing per day, you could say. I worked on the Sparrow top for 2 days straight. Not 2 days straight, obviously I did other things, but I didn't knit anything else during that time. Like I didn't work on my Swedish spring at all. And then I picked that one up yesterday or the day before, and I just worked on that for the rest of the week. So I don't know, it's just, I know knitting shouldn't stress me out, but sometimes I get a little bit overwhelmed with what I'm working on, and I think I just need to finish some things off before I start anything new, and just be ready to knit what I want, and that's it. So I hope you have a nice week. I realize now that I didn't ask you guys a question for the group this week, but I would love your input on maybe how you measure your knitting, or if you take into consideration row count. I know that I didn't start doing that until I started understanding gauge better after knitting some of the custom fit sweaters by Amy Herzog, and after taking the custom fit class on Craftsy. So I think that's it for this week. I hope you have a nice week, and remember to get your finished shawls into the finished shawl thread on the Ravelry forums in the Stitch in Sweden group so that you can be eligible for a prize. I will show you once again the lovely bag that was donated by Lee from Shop Lee. This bag here. I don't believe I have said yet. I was thinking that we were going to have some other prizes coming in the mail, but I don't know if they haven't gotten here yet or what happened exactly, but I haven't received them yet. So I would like to donate a prize as well, and that will be your choice of either, it will be your choice of two different kinds of yarns, which are, they're both yarns one's from Norway and one's from Denmark. And they're two yarns that I really enjoy knitting with, and you will have the choice of 2 balls of either or of those yarns. One of them is the Yaku yarn, which I'm knitting my Swedish spring out of, so you could get 2 balls of this. Or you could, I have the tag covered up because 2 balls of this, which is 100% superwash merino wool, and it's a fingering weight. Or you could get 2 balls of Rauma fin ull garn, which is a Norwegian yarn, I believe, and I really enjoy that yarn for color work. So you could get 2 different colors of that, and that would be enough to knit like a pair of mittens, color work mittens, or something like that. It will be up to the winner for what type of yarn they want and what color. So that's it. I hope you guys have a great week and that you have lots of time for knitting and other crafts. So I'll see you next week. Bye!